given that we are exploited by tax havens, and also we are the most predatory tax haven, and given that we've got ourselves in a situation where our manufacturing has been run down and we are now this huge financial services industry, if the British government was to suddenly go through a Damascene conversion and say, right, we're going to stop this, would the immediate impact be a huge loss of wealth for Britain? My concern about that is that although it may be a very noble thing to do, if we're going to get people on side to pressure the government, how do we sell that if the initial impact is going to be a huge loss to the British economy? And also, I'm just going to get to the second question on. You showed the list of all the tax havens, 2/3 of which are British controlled. If they were to be eliminated, you've still got a third which probably aren't. Would that not just mean that a chain only being as strong as its weakest link, all those companies and all those individuals would just simply shift to the non-UK controlled tax havens, and therefore, although we in Britain could think great, we've done the right thing, on a worldwide level the problem would not have been solved?
Okay. I'll answer the last part of the question first. If you look at the measures that Tax Justice Network is promoting, we're a global network. By and large, we're pushing for global systemic changes. Almost all of the devices used by the tax havens could be remedied very, very simply. For example, trusts, which are highly secretive. We all think of tax havens as about banking secrecy in Switzerland. Forget it. That's the amateur end of the scale. The really serious people who use offshore, think George Osborne and his family affairs are in Cayman, use trusts, because trusts have no disclosure requirements imposed upon them whatsoever. In this country, or in Jersey, or in Guernsey, or in Cayman, there's no disclosure on it. So they're the ultimate way of hiding your identity. And no one apart from an amateur would simply open up a Swiss bank account and try to evade it around that. All of these things can be curtailed systemically through Financial Action Task Force, which is the International Monetary Fund's anti-money laundering. They are pushing for disclosure of trust information. They are pushing for disclosure of who hides behind the offshore companies. They are pushing for, the European Union is pushing for automatic information exchange to become the effective standard within the European Union. And now G20, under pressure from India, is saying this must become the global standard. Rather than simply trying to tackle Britain's tax havens, do it systemically, think systemically, change the rules. Because what Britain has done very effectively, and this is all largely in place before we decolonized, before we closed down the former empire, we created the rules of the game. They were there in place in the 1920s. The way in which multinational companies are taxed largely shaped up the British company law. The way in which information is shared, or blocking of information, again, around trust, for example, largely lied in common law practices coming out of Britain. So Britain is a key player there, but the remedies lie with systemic, all of which are being pushed at one level or another. The European Union wants to do this. No question about that. The United Nations tax system wants to move in this direction. It's being blocked.
Is it only being blocked by Britain, or are there some other players behind this?
Oh, of course there are other players. Ireland, for example, their development strategy is very similar, comparable to Britain's. Switzerland, of course, has been blocking. Luxembourg is another example of the finance curse. Their steel industry died off in the 1970s. They went into financial services. They are, I think, this world's second largest secrecy jurisdiction in the world. The largest offshore fund management industry in the world. So there are other key players that have been politically blocking progress. But I would say to you, in all earnestness, that if we don't tackle this problem, you'll be mopping up the symptoms rather than tackling the root causes for the rest of your lives and ad nauseam, because you've got to get to the root causes of why wealth, far from being trickling down in any way, has been concentrating in the hands of a tiny minority who are sitting offshore and using offshore as their mechanism for blocking democracy, blocking governance, blocking accountability, blocking taxation.
So can I just go back to my initial question? I'm thinking very much...
What can we do about it?
Well, no, I'm thinking very much as knocking back to this. If we go and pressure the government and say, right, you've got to change, and they come back and go, well, if we change, the British economy will lose lots of money, and everyone just goes to Luxembourg, so we're not going to change. How do we counter that?
Yes, and this is where I think the finance curse idea has such political traction, which is why Nick and I are so attracted to it, and I hope some of you will like this idea as well. Because the argument has always been, well, we'll just keep growing our finance industry, we can all be bankers. And growing the finance industry is the future of our economy, and we're now saying, no, quite the opposite. Far from being the future of our economy, it is damaging our long-term economic prospects and our social welfare and our democratic processes. Like the same way that the resource curse damages hydrocarbon economies. And therefore we must adapt political measures to mitigate against the harm caused by the finance curse. And earlier this year, the IMF came out supporting us with a paper called Too Much Finance, big question mark, in which they say exactly the same thing. Beyond a certain scale, your financial services industry no longer contributes to the welfare of the society.
My question actually leads pretty much